Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really fascinating guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Aarti Holla-Maini, who is the director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, located in Vienna. They're part of the United Nations organization that ultimately works to promote international cooperation in the peaceful use and exploration of space, as well as the utilization of space science and technology for various sustainable economic and social development programs. Ms. Holla-Maini brings to this position over 25 years of professional experience in the space sector, including in managerial and advocacy functions. Most recently, she held the role of Executive Vice President of Sustainability Policy and Impact at NorthStar Earth Space, and prior to that, she spent over 18 years as both Secretary General as well as consultant to the Global Satellite Operators Association. Her experience is quite broad, including as a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Space, a member of the advisory group of the Space Sustainability Rating managed by eSpace at EPFL Space Center, as well as a member of the advisory board of the Satellite Industry Association in India and Senior Space Policy Advisor of the Forum of Europe, as well as an expert advisor on space traffic management for the EU. Her bachelor's was originally in law with a focus on German law from King's College, went on to do a master's in business administration from HEC Paris, and she's also an alumna of the International Space University. A lot of really cool topics to get into today, and very honored to have her with us. Aarti Holla-Maini, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me with you.
Wonderful having you. I neglected in your extensive bio, which we will be putting in the show notes, to mention that in addition to all of that, you are quite fluent in multiple languages. I was reading about you that law and space were not actually your initial interest. You had a real passion for the study of languages to start out with, and would love to hear just a little bit about the very early days of your background. If you could start off there before we get into space and all the other things we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So I'm of Indian origin, but I was born by accident in the UK at a time when we still lived in India. But from 1972 onwards, I was raised in the UK. And indeed, I think the subjects that I was best at in school were languages, French and German specifically. And so that's what I really wanted to pursue at university, but my parents wouldn't let me. Being traditional Indian parents, they insisted on a profession, like pharmacy or law or something like that. And so I found a compromise, which was law with German law. So here we are.
Excellent. And yeah, in addition to that, I was reading while, you like the principle of law, going to court really wasn't your thing. I know you worked as a solicitor for a couple of years, but it was ultimately an interview, I think originally at Daimler-Benz Aerospace, which ultimately becomes part of the Airbus organization. And it was interesting. You were talking about how, a lot of people will tell their story about space and how they're lying on a hill somewhere and looking up at the stars and deciding, hey, that's what you want to do. It was your sort of, first, exposure to military aircraft and helicopters and satellites and all things that sort of the Daimler portfolio was at the time that really excited you. Talk a little bit about your move from law initially into business development in the aerospace industry and some of your experiences there, if you would.
Sure. What I don't like doing is sitting over agreements and contracts. That absolutely killed me. The only bit of being a solicitor that I did enjoy was the few episodes where you could go to court and perform, if you will, or public speaking. So I realized already where my strength lay at that time, but I didn't know what I would do with it. I just knew that law wasn't for me. So I applied for an MBA, which was actually a bilingual MBA in French and English at HEC, a grande école in France. It's like one of the French Ivy League schools. And they had a German fair where German companies were coming to town. And so I had my CV in German and I sent it in and I was invited for interviews by Mercedes-Benz and Daimler-Benz Aerospace. And Daimler-Benz Aerospace then invited me for an assessment center, which I knew that I wasn't a finance type on my MBA. Therefore, I assumed I was the consulting type because in those days, either you were going to go into finance, into the city, onto Wall Street or something, or you were going to go down the consultancy route. So I thought, well, I need practice in assessment centers. So off I went to Munich to learn what does an aerospace company do. And I found it exciting. I found the whole experience interesting, exciting, something that I could be passionate about. And plus, I realized, I think at that time, probably for the first time, that I had a competitive streak in me. And so I really wanted to be selected, and I was. And given that I didn't really know what my future, career would be, a general management program seemed like a good choice.
Mhm.
So that's how I got into the space sector. Initially, I worked in satellites, specifically in satellite navigation. This is before the Galileo program in Europe was born. It didn't exist yet. We were still doing studies on what a global navigation satellite system born in Europe would look like. I worked in that. I did 3 months in aircraft lease finance, which was another portfolio, one of the portfolios that the Daimler-Benz Aerospace Group had. And then came back to satellite operations and services, which is when DASA, as it was called then, was about to merge with Matra, and Astrium and EADS were about to be born. But Daimler-Benz Aerospace already had ambitions which were looked on by the rest of the company as crazy, totally unrealistic ambitions of becoming a satellite operator. But after that merger, Astrium Services was born and became extremely successful, became one of the most successful satcoms operators focusing on secure communications. And that's how I went from satellite manufacturing then to satcoms.
Mhm.
After I moved to Brussels, I was sent to Brussels, I must say, still for satellite navigation to be the German representative in a European joint venture. But after 4 years, they called me back to Munich. By then, I was married to my husband who worked in the European Commission. There was no going back to Germany after moving to Belgium. And I found a job with what was then the European Satellite Operators Association, which I switched to. So I jumped from space manufacturing, from the hardware side to the operations side in SATCOMs, satellite communications. And that's where I stayed for the next 18 and a half years, taking the European Association to become an EMEA association representing an
Mhm.
additional 11 satellite operators from the Middle East region, eventually to 2022 when we took it global and it became GSOA, the Global Satellite
Mhm.
Operators Association. And I left there at the end of January 2022. Or was that 22 or sorry, end of January 2023.
Three. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's a very interesting period because in general, you look at what well ultimately becomes GSOA, the Global Satellite Operators Association, and almost like a small version of what you're doing now in terms of regulations, policy making, standard setting, and clearly between 2004 and 2023, let's just say a lot more stuff has been put up there
Yeah.
in the satellite domain. We'll get to some of the topics in terms of space sustainability and some of the topics like that. But key learnings from that period, because clearly, again, what was originally a European organization, you expand quite broadly to multiple countries, multiple satellite operators. What were some of the takeaways from that period? Because it's one thing having a few satellites up there, but another thing
Yeah.
having multiple countries with thousands of things floating
Yes.
above us right now.
So if I can just wind back just a second to when I started with DASA in Munich
Sure,
in 97, one
sure.
of the first things that I was confronted with was Teledesic Celestri Skybridge, which was the first round of attempts for LEO broadband constellations.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was in 98. I remember when Teledesic visited DASA at the time because they were looking for their prime to manufacture the satellites. But of course, that wave of LEO broadband constellations didn't get off the ground. The technology was not mature enough. They hadn't figured out the business plan really at all. There was not enough interest in investing in these systems at that time. So it's very interesting to think back to 1998 when the first attempt at that technology solution, at that business plan was made. Fast forward to the 2000s when they then became a reality. They started becoming a reality with OneWeb and then, Amazon and Starlink, becoming reality. So it's very interesting to have seen the beginning and to have seen the progression of how technology has evolved, how regulation has evolved, how the policy attitude has changed towards satellite, towards the technology, towards the systems, towards the capabilities, and to have followed that through the ages, if you will. What was your question again? You asked
Yeah.
about the major takeaways.
Yes, yes. Perfect. Perfect.
The major takeaways. I think, when I started in ESOA, as it was then, I
Right.
remember my first meetings with the European Commission. People didn't know who the satellite operators were. People had
Mm-hmm.
never heard of them. They may have heard of not even SES, but of Astra. Yeah, they had heard of Astra in Europe because you could buy a satellite dish and people knew that it would connect to Astra or potentially Eutelsat. But otherwise, nobody had heard of who the satellite operators were. And that was surprising for me because having been at EADS Astrium, the Holy Grail were the satellite operators. They were your ultimate customer. If you could sell something to the satellite operators, you had made it. That was really what every manufacturer wanted to do. So coming then to the European Commission and the policy side and realizing that, wow, we are invisible. This is an invisible infrastructure, but really invisible to policymakers compared with where we are now is mind-blowing. It is really mind-blowing. Yeah. We worked very hard to foster an understanding of what satellites did from the basic broadcasting capability. When we were young, you would turn on the news and you would see live by satellite as a caption when disasters or major world events were being broadcast, be it, the World Cup final or Wimbledon final or a pope being elected or whatever big thing was happening, it would always be transmitted live via satellite. And that went, right? We became technology neutral, technology agnostic. It became a mantra, at least of the European Commission, that they were technology neutral. And so it became very hard for us to push what was a unique solution, unique in terms of the ability to broadcast live events and provide coverage and instant information. Regardless of where something was happening around the world, be it a disaster, be it a moon landing, be it, whatever it might be. The ability to provide communications where otherwise there were none after a disaster. Yeah, an earthquake, a war, whatever it is. So that education process of policymakers that took an awfully long time. But then we were caught up in the wave of liberalization of the telecom sector when the legacy telcos, which are owned by governments, were being privatized, when the questions of spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum,
Yep.
frequency spectrum, were coming up, the questions of should spectrum be auctioned, how do we charge for spectrum, should we charge satellite operators for spectrum? Yeah, this came about, and all of a sudden the satellite sector found itself having to do huge heavy lifting in terms of lobbying telecoms regulators on why, number one, they shouldn't charge satellite operators for spectrum. Number two, why they needed to preserve satellite spectrum for crucial services that the satellite operators were providing, be they hidden services like secure communications. Since the Gulf War, especially the second Gulf War, satellite communications have been used for secure communications by any government that has a military, basically, in the developed world at least. But of course, nobody knows that. It is critical. It can be life-saving, but nobody knows. And then there are so many services that you take for granted, whether it's weather forecasting, turning on your TV, looking at what's the weather, what do we wear today, how do you prepare for the week to come, or what do you take on holiday? These kind of things which nobody ever thought to link to a technology that comes from space or to satellite, right? So the education piece was a very heavy lift over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And look at where we are today.
Yep.
Everybody has heard of space, not necessarily for the right reasons. When you think of people today, it's like, oh yeah, all the junk up there, or oh yes, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, right? They think of space and satellites not necessarily for the right reasons, but that has been great for us because it has shone a spotlight on a sector which wasn't receiving any airtime really at all.
Mm-hmm.
And much needed attention because we need to shape policy in order to help us enable space and satellite services, be it data, be it communications, be it navigation, to play their rightful role in society, whether it's for the developed world, whether it's for the developing world. If you think about the developing world, you think of digital divide, data divide. So in my previous life, where it was only satcoms, we were all about bridging the digital divide, enabling education for all, bringing healthcare to remote communities who wouldn't otherwise have it. Now at the UN, I realized that there's more than 25 different organizations and entities within the UN system who rely on satellite imagery and data to execute their mandates, to implement their missions. Right? So I have been woken up to the data divide, which was not on my radar at all beforehand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been very, very interesting. I think satellites play a really important role in so many different ways. There are a myriad of ways in which space technology, space itself, and satellites contribute to so many of the SDGs, all of the SDGs, in fact.
Yep.
So the learning, what have been the major takeaways? They don't stop. They keep coming. Yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
learning all the time about how we contribute to making the world a more inclusive, a more sustainable, a safer, more secure place.
Excellent. And that's a perfect segue for your current role, and we're going to get into some of the topics per the SDGs in a moment. But could you talk just a little bit about the history of the current organization, United Nations Office for Space Affairs? Goes back to, I was straight, 1958, very very important period of obvious time, and at the time was advising something known as the Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Talk a little about the history, if you would, your role as director, and just a little bit of sort of your day to day, and how how did you get there ultimately? Did the Secretary General of the UN call you up and say, hey, we have this role and we'd like to, you're perfect for this? How did you get to to the new office following what you're doing for the last 2 decades per GSOA?
Okay, so Ira, there's a lot of questions in what you just asked. Let's unpack them one by one. So
Sure.
how did I get this role? I'd been at GSOA, GSOA for 18 and a half years.
Mm-hmm.
many people told me, you've done this for long enough. What is the next thing? I applied for this post because it's very rare that a senior post in space at the UN comes up. So when I saw it was vacant, I thought, why not apply? It's always good to see, are you wanted somewhere else? What is your value? And so on. I never in a million years thought that I would get it. And indeed, the rumor mill told me that I had no chance of getting it, that what was needed at this time because of space governance was a space lawyer. And I wasn't one. So the rumor mill said, no chance, don't hold out for that, etc., etc. And the UN takes a very long time to recruit. So I think I applied, when was it? In 22? And I did not hear about the job until close to a year later that I was selected. And yes, it was the executive office of the Secretary General that called me and said that, are you still interested? That's the first question the UN has to ask you because it was probably a year before that you actually applied, and who knows what might have happened in your life, and maybe you've moved on and you're not interested in anymore. So I said I was, and they said, okay, so many people are telling the SG that he's taken a risk by taking somebody from industry, but we feel that you have the right profile to bridge the gap between industry, which is driving so many of the space activities now, and the needs of space governance and this office at this time. So, having come here, I do see how my industry experience brings a very clear added value. Um, I, however, see a bit of resistance to accepting leadership from what is meant to be the secretariat to COPUOS, to the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. So you are right. This office was established in 1958 as a tiny expert unit in New York to service what was then an ad hoc Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, known as COPUOS. At that time, I believe there was like 15 or 18 member states. Today we are 104. We now have a further, I think it's 6 or 7 applications from member states who want to join the committee, and we have a target of making that 150 by 2030. So we're on our way. But historically, the office has played a secretariat role, which means supporting the meetings, servicing the meetings, preparing the agenda, supporting member states. It has never, from what I can judge, I have not seen the office providing leadership in a sense of supporting member states to understand what they need to do next based on the trends and the events that are happening in the broader space sector. So shining a spotlight on what the real space world is doing and using that to inform the work of the committee. And that is what I'm trying to do. One, inform the work of the committee, support member states on what their priorities should be and where they need to advance, and hopefully help them accelerate in their way of working. I mean, this is a committee which has existed for 6 decades. Yes, it is slow, but it has consistently delivered and evolved over time. It was born at the height of the Cold War. The two key adversaries were able to find consensus on the Outer Space Treaty. They led that process. They brought other member states on board with them. In the years to follow, in the next less than a decade to follow, another 4 space treaties were adopted by consensus, yeah? And these 5 space treaties, or at least 4 of them, are today the cornerstone of the global space economy. And we hear a lot of criticism. Oh, they're old, they're out of date. Not true. They are coming to life now in a way that they were never called upon to do so before. And I am, quite frankly, the more I think about this, and these are things that I am learning in real time now in these weeks and months, our office is being contacted by countries who are seeing debris land on their territory. It's not just Kenya with the big piece of debris a few months ago, Poland more recently. We just had our legal subcommittee, which closed 2 weeks ago. And we had Algeria, who came up to us during the meeting and said, hey, we've realized that space debris has recently landed on our territory, right? So this is happening more and more. And we do have the agreement on the rescue and return of astronauts, known as ARA. right?
Right.
Adopted back in the 70s,
Yep.
which actually discusses the rights and obligations of countries should this happen. How did they know back in the early 70s? How could they foresee that this would happen at the rate that it's happening now? I find that quite astonishing.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like at that time, it was true science fiction for them that
Hmm.
these kind of things would happen, that there would be multiple missions to the moon, that there would be constellations of hundreds or thousands of satellites. They could not have known this. Yet, multiple provisions of multiple treaties are coming to life now to respond to what we're seeing happen. And I
Hmm.
think that is impressive. That is a testimony to what COPUOS achieved back in those days. But look at how it has evolved. Already more than 10 years ago, we had the space debris mitigation guidelines, which were put into place. Now we have, in 2019, the long-term sustainability guidelines put into place, developed together with industry.
Yep.
Very important to note, COPUOS is a member state-driven process and forum. It is, and many people criticize it that not only is it old, not only is it out of date, but it doesn't have industry. How can you make decisions on space governance if you don't have industry weighing in?
Right.
I come from industry. I understand that world very, very well. There are two reasons why you don't want industry in that room and involved in the decision making directly. One is, trust me, industry would want to shoot themselves if they had to sit through COPUOS meetings. Okay. That's the first reason. So it is a certain dynamic, it is a diplomatic process where industry would not find its way. That's number one. Secondly, if you bring industry into the mix and you allow what you see happening in other fora, which are pay to play, right? Think of spectrum lobbying. Yeah, you have multiple delegations who sit, for example, within the ITU, who are represented by their industry,
Hmm.
right? Huawei, Samsung, AT&T, Verizon. These companies represent their countries in when compatibility studies are being done on the coexistence of satellite with mobile operators in certain frequency bands. Okay, the satellite sector has lost out because it does not have the financial power to put behind its advocacy. If you now bring money into the politics in COPUOS, even
Hmm.
within the satellite sector, you have companies with very deep pockets. You have others who don't have those deep pockets.
Hmm.
You would create a disproportionate balance of power there, which would not be good. But most importantly, you would compromise the chances of building trust between the member states. What do I mean by that? If we think about space traffic coordination,
Hmm.
ideally, you want every operator, be they public, be they private, to be talking to each other, to be sharing information about their satellites, about their constellations. Where are my satellites? Are they maneuverable or not? What is my what is my risk profile? Am I risk averse? At what threshold will I move my satellite if I get a conjunction? Maybe I'm risk averse, and if you're within 8 or 10 kilometers of my satellite, I'm already going to move. Maybe I'm not risk averse and I won't move until you're close to me by 4 kilometers. I don't know. Every operator is different. But unless we have more precise information, more information sharing by public and private operators from all countries, we will not be able to ensure optimum space safety. Why is COPUOS necessary for this? In COPUOS, every member state, be they spacefaring or not spacefaring, be they a large member state or a small member state, whether they have satellites or they don't have satellites, they all sit and decide, they take their decisions by consensus on an equal footing. The tiniest island state can block a COPUOS decision. Yeah.
Hmm.
So it means that this is the best conditions that you could possibly have to foster mutual trust and confidence between countries. And you need that if you want Chinese operators, Russian operators, operators from all countries to participate, you
Mm-hmm.
know, in a mechanism. But many countries don't, they're averse to industry participating. They don't have necessarily companies with large constellations. They don't have, some countries don't have a large commercial sector at all. They
Sure.
believe that space should really be the purview, at least at decision-making level, of member states only. So
Right.
if you have some who insist on the industry being there, you compromise that equal footing trust basis that COPUOS has today. Yeah. So I can't remember where I started when I started on this long-winded story. But I hope that gives you a sense of why we need to preserve the member state-driven process within COPUOS. Yeah.
Absolutely.
While making sure that COPUOS decisions and deliberations are absolutely informed by industry. What are
Mm-hmm.
the latest developments? What are the needs of industry? How do we get industry to invest more in areas where there is a need? For example, on-orbit servicing, active debris removal. They need certainty, they need clarity. COPUOS has the mandate around these kind of space governance questions. Therefore, there needs to be an interaction. And me coming from the private sector, I'm doing a lot more of that. So during
Mm-hmm.
COPUOS meetings, we have a lot of side events. We are repeatedly and increasingly bringing different industry players to inform the committee and giving the COPUOS member states the opportunity to mingle with them, to ask them questions, to have their own information acquired from industry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can
And
ramble, can't I?
no, you're great. You're great. No, I'm really enjoying this and thinking about, you're talking about all the member states and again the need to cooperate. You were talking about space debris before, not the stuff that falls out of the sky, but the stuff that's still up there. And you've written about this 9,000 tons or so of stuff that's spinning around as we're speaking right now at something like 15,000 miles an hour. So a lot of little bullets. We had Dr. Morbaja on last year talking about sort of some of the strategies on how we find out where it is, especially if the things that are cell phone size or microwave oven size and all that. What's the space object register all about? Because I think that obviously, whether it's American or Russian or Chinese stuff, debris, it's nice to cooperate so we know that it's not going to fall in Algeria and Kenya, but that we have some type of system in place to monitor when it does get out of control. Talk a little space object register, if you would.
Yeah, so everything which is launched into space should be registered with the United Nations. This is a treaty obligation on the Secretary General, which is executed by UNOOSA as
Yep.
his office for this. Right now, we have about 88.5% of everything that was ever launched, which has been registered. We have just, I think it was 2 weeks ago, been doing capacity building workshops with the national focal points for registration in different spacefaring nations to
Mm-hmm.
help them understand why do we do this? How do you do this? How can we work together to make sure that we go from 88.5% to 100%? Ultimately, the register is a database which provides information on who owns what in space. That's very important. That can be important especially when you think about debris which is fallen.
Right.
We can actually help countries identify what has fallen, and we can cross-reference with the register. We also did a workshop together with the ITU because, of
Mm-hmm.
course, they have their own master frequency register, which is about everything which has been filed with the ITU, which then eventually becomes a reality or not. So we have a certain register, so do there. It's always good to cross-reference and see how can we help each other, how can we improve the global state of knowledge on what
Mm-hmm.
is in space by leveraging the information that each of us has.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're trying to
And
digitize that register. So sorry,
no,
we
please.
right. right now we have one person in this office who's responsible for that register. That guy manually has been entering every satellite that was ever launched. That was fine at a time when there was maybe 15 to 20 satellites being launched in a year. But
Right.
at a time where it's now thousands, that doesn't work anymore. The poor guy has arthritis in both wrists. So we are looking to digitize it, but also share the burden with member states so that they can potentially register their own objects for us to verify. This is taking a little bit of time, obviously, but we hope to get there in the coming year or so.
And can you talk a little bit while we're on that topic of again different countries, different legal systems? Obviously every country has, and I'm talking to a lawyer here. Civil law and common law and customary law and all this. It varies. What does space law mean at UNOOSA? I mean, is there one sort of set of space law? Does every country have their own space law? How does that work? So walk us through that for a little bit, if you would.
So first thing I would do is make a plug for the Astro database that we have, which is linked to the UNOOSA website,
Yep.
where all space laws around the world are actually listed. So you can look at different countries and what they have in place. I don't know how complete it is, but I think it's fairly complete, and we keep pushing to have that information there. What is space law? So as an office, we do capacity building around space law. That means we support countries put their space law and policy into place. It can mean many different things. Sometimes there's countries who have never had a space law. Take Kenya. Kenya won a competition run by UNOOSA, and we helped them through that competition put their very first satellite into space. This was a few years ago. Based on that, they established their first space agency, the Kenya Space Agency, and they realized that actually we should have a space law. UNOOSA ran a technical advisory mission where we bring different experts from academia, industry, civil society, and of course UNOOSA's office to work with the Kenya Space Agency and ministries to see, okay, what are your needs? Where are you at in your space journey? What is it that you need in your country? Yeah. You
Mm-hmm.
probably don't need a register of space objects because you've only got one at this point, and yet they were in the process of building their second satellite. Yeah. So we helped Kenya, but we have helped multiple other countries, and we see lots of different asks in that process. We have right now a line of more than 60 countries who are waiting to receive those services from us for technical advisory missions. But we have some who say, we don't have a regulator. Help us put a
Mm-hmm.
regulation, a space regulation into place. Help us to establish a regulator. Help us to put to develop a national register of objects. We want to have a spaceport on our territory, but we don't have a space law. How do we put it? What do we need in our country to establish a spaceport? We have other countries who are spacefaring, who say, actually, we've been launching satellites for years, but we don't actually have a space law. What does that need to look like? We have
Mm-hmm.
others who say, we haven't ratified the treaties. Can you help us put together whatever we need to persuade our parliament to move to ratify the treaties? So space law within UNOOSA has different dimensions, and we do missions which are tailor-made depending on the need and the instance in a space journey, depending on where the member state is at. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's what that means.
Excellent. Excellent. Um, we talked a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals, and again, we'll link to the full list of SDGs per UNOOSA because, as you mentioned before, you're involved in all of them. And some of these things like remote sensing in terms of climate change and studying sort of how space impacts human health, we've covered on the show. Some of these we haven't. They're equally fascinating. Things like responsible consumption, clean water and sanitation. Obviously, if we don't perfect those, the people on the spaceship don't do very well for a couple of
Yeah.
days. And then,
Yeah.
what in terms of the SDGs, what stands out to you? Which ones are you most excited about? Are there specific projects there that you'd like to highlight that hey, we might normally think about this as being something that space science and technology benefit, but wow, This is a great dual use opportunity. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
I think there are some stories. There are a lot of very powerful stories and ways that space technology has been used to deliver on different components of the SDGs or different SDGs. Um, I what can I tell you? Let's start from the basics. You can have there's an SDG. I don't have a background in the UN like historically, so I don't have these things on my fingertips in like precisely what are the different SDGs. But for example, if you think about enabling universal primary education for all, or just
Okay.
education for all, or
Yeah,
healthcare for all, right? These are things which can be enabled using satellite communications. And I think back to my previous job now, and I'm promoting the use cases that I learned about then in my
sure.
current role, because now I am the UN and our mission is to enable space for the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I mentioned Kenya earlier. Let's stick with that. In
Sure.
Kenya, you have Avanti Space, which is a UK-based satellite operator, which has connected 245 schools via satellite. That in itself is, you could argue, no big deal. Yeah, Satcoms connects many different things in the world. But what is really amazing about this is that by enabling access to an online program called Maths Whiz for just 1 hour per week per child, yeah, they measured that at the end of a year, the child's learning age had increased by 18 months, right?
Mm.
So you think of a remote isolated school which has rudimentary infrastructure at best. Yes, it might have some light bulbs and basic electricity. Having digital infrastructure there is not something they've ever imagined before. But Avanti worked with different stakeholders, content providers, the government, schools, education ministry, and so on, to enable basic laptops to be put into those schools, laptops, tablets, what have you, so that every child can have a login, goes into this quiz. Basically, it's like a game. It's like a game, and it's tailor made to each child because you log in, you do one level. If you fail the level, it keeps you at that level and gives you more and more questions or quizzes at the same level. But as that child progresses, it goes up, right? So you can imagine I go on it as a 10-year-old and I might be at level 1. You go on it as an 8-year-old, might already be at level 3. So I think it's incredible how simply putting a dish on the roof of a school and enabling pretty basic internet access in that school can have such a transformational impact. And what does that mean? When you think about education for children, in
Yep.
this case, it started with marginalized girls. It was a UK development aid project which was focusing on gender equality. So it started with marginalized girls until the Kenyan communities realized that, hey, boys are now being marginalized because the attention is all on girls. And in fact, we want to educate all of our children. So it expanded to be available for all the kids in the school, right? But you are giving them access to STEM education at the most basic level, basic maths, right?
Right.
Which is enabling them to go to the next level. But you are hitting where it is really necessary to break the cycle of poverty. You're educating one child, perhaps the first child in that family that has ever had education, right? Which goes on to get a job, which lifts the family. If you educate 10 children in that community, you lift the entire community. This is the basis of breaking the cycle of poverty in a community. And if you can scale the project to national, which is what I would like to try to support as UNOOSA, through the whole country, right? So that is the power of satellite. And I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
Think again. This came to real. This was highlighted big time during COVID. The need for internet connectivity. People couldn't move. They needed to be connected. A, for access to information, B, in order for capitals or hospitals to have access to data of what was happening in remote communities, how many people were infected, how do we spread information about how to stay safe during COVID. So satellite broadband got a big boost during COVID time. It also got a lot of attention. The need to bridge the digital divide got a lot of attention. It was good for satcoms at that time. Yeah, satellite broadband has been marginalized because it was never as good as as terrestrial connectivity. It's no brainer for us to have 20 megabit per second, 50 megabit per second, 100 megabit per second internet connectivity. When you think about satellite broadband, it has typically been in 15, 20, 30, maybe 50 megabit per second, right?
Sure.
It's only in the US that we talk about speeds of 100 or 150 megabit per second for household broadband, residential
Mhm.
broadband. With COVID, people realized that any level of connectivity is a good thing. That gave satellite broadband a boost. But what I wanted to highlight was in the field of healthcare, because
Yeah.
there's also SDGs around healthcare. There's an NGO called Friendship, which has
Okay.
floating hospitals. Yeah. So you
Hmm.
see images of ships and boats which have satellite broadband terminals on them. Right. So look at this slide here. This is a Friendship floating hospital. And this is on the around the fjords of Bangladesh.
Mm.
Bangladesh was hit hard by the tsunami back in, was that in 2006, 2007?
Yep.
Ira, we're living at a time when the today's youth don't even remember this. Can you imagine? But so this is the coastal community. You can see residents of that coastal community who go onto that ship to receive healthcare, diagnosis of diseases which they may never have had diagnosed otherwise. Yeah, you and I, we have the luxury of having maybe a GP who knows us, who maybe has known us since we were young, or at least for the last 10 years, who we can go back to and say, oh, doctor, remember I had this problem last year. I think it's come back. These are communities who never benefit from constant, repeated healthcare opportunities like we do in the modern world. Yeah, but thanks to satellite communications and this kind of initiative, we're able to bring healthcare to communities who would otherwise never have it. Yeah. And I think that again is transformational. The image on the right is in Benin. This was a project
Okay.
run by Inmarsat
Sure.
for expectant mothers. So again, I think that picture is outside a school. The school may have been connected, but you can see a BGAN on the chair. That is the terminal. It's basically the satellite dish, if you will,
Yep. Yep.
which is pointed at the satellite, which is enabling internet connectivity. And you can see an expectant mother there getting some treatment, and her data is being transmitted back to capital. Yeah. So we often see these instances of even telemedicine, remote surgery, remote diagnoses. You might have nurses in the field or healthcare professionals who are not really qualified practitioners, but they are speaking
Sure.
live in real time with surgeons, with qualified professionals in urban centers, in hospitals, and they're able to provide telemedicine services, remote diagnosis, and so on. So I think that's really transformational. Here's images of the Syrian Turkish earthquake on the left. Yeah,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know that when disaster strikes, terrestrial infrastructure is often destroyed. One of the first things to go is communications. The image on the right there is a lady using an ISAT phone, an Inmarsat phone. And this is not only for first responders and governments to coordinate their response and and so on, including UN workers who are deployed in the field, connecting with headquarters in Geneva, in New York, but also for the affected population to be able to call their loved ones and say, I'm alive, I'm here, they found me. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, space technology, satellite communication, satellite imagery can really be life-saving in a very real sense. So, I
Hmm.
just wanted to give you a sense of that. But here, Image on the left, you can see that video. You can see deforestation. You can see
Yep.
reforestation from space. You can identify using heat maps from space where are the optimal areas to put a field of solar panels, for example. Yeah. Where are the optimal inclinations to put to plant coffee
Right.
or different crops which have different conditions which are good for them. Yeah. So you mentioned about the different SDGs, of course, agriculture, farming, water, all of these things go to the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see that whether it's satellite communications, whether it's satellite imagery and data, or even position navigation and timing services, all
Hmm.
of these can come together to be quite transformational when deployed at local level. UNOOSA is a really small office, so the capacity building work that we do is always local, and that means that while our impact might not be global in the sense of we're not yet able to scale what we do. We want to grow to be able to scale it. But
Sure.
at least the stories that we tell are high impact at a local level. We are all about empowering member states, empowering local communities. This is not for show. It's about making a difference and building resilience at the local level. And I'm very
Hmm.
proud that UNOOSA, despite being a small office, is able to make a difference. The challenge for us is how do we grow and scale what we
Right.
do, because we know what we do is quite unique.
Got it.
I'll stop sharing.
No, these are again these are beautiful examples, and I'm so glad you highlighted those. And again, we'll put the links to everything that's happening for the SDGs at UNOOSA. Yeah, I mean these are wonderful visions. Could you say a few words about the other sort of things that concern you? Because clearly, whether we're talking about satellites, we talked on a show a little while ago that we just passed the 40-year anniversary. I'm talking here from the U.S. perspective of President Reagan's Star Wars announcement. We profiled something recently from the White House here, known as the Planetary Defense Program. But it doesn't have anything to do with invasion or anything. It has to do, when we go to moon, when we go to Mars, if we contaminate with some microbe or whatever, what who sets the rules about that? What happens to that area and so forth? What keeps you up at night? What things concern you, and that you have to, hey, we better spend a little more time on this, even though we are a small group. These are issues that we also need to talk about with the member states.
So what I love about what you just talked through there is that we work on all of those issues,
Right.
whether it's the planetary defense and the near-Earth object threats. We just had an expert meeting on planetary defense in South Africa, which we're secretariat to that. We followed very much the very closely the asteroid that was foreseen to come in 2032.
Hmm.
Which was extremely close, was predicted to be extremely close to Earth. It actually triggered an international network information process, which UNOOSA facilitates here. But we also are working on space resources and these issues of the moon that you just referred to. So that some of these activities fall within UNOOSA's mandate as a capacity builder, and some of these activities fall very much within COPUOS's mandate because they concern governance
Got
issues.
it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So capacity building is all about bringing different groups of people together to share knowledge. Thinking of planetary defense, there are so many countries in the world who do care about this, who would be affected by this potentially, but who simply don't have the capacity to
Right.
participate in those activities, to contribute to those activities. But we want to make sure that they are informed and involved as best possible. That's where we come in. We make sure that that information flows to every member state. We make sure that every member state can have a voice in that, yeah, regardless of their capabilities and capacities nationally. But we have within COPUOS a working group on the legal aspects of space resources.
Okay.
And that is all to do with mining on the moon? What do we do with regolith? What do we do with helium-3 and water and all of these
Yep.
things we may potentially find on the moon? What about if we decide to mine asteroids, land on them, and do things with them, right? The principles that should govern that. There has been an initial set of draft principles, which the
Hmm.
member states had been discussing for the last 2 years, which are now circulated just 3 weeks ago to all of the member states, who are now beginning to negotiate them. The
Got it.
objective is to arrive at a final set of principles. Now, interesting is that we talk about principles, guidelines, recommendations, which have no teeth. We have no teeth, right? And
Right.
yet we think these are really important issues. What's the value in negotiating and discussing a set of principles, for God's sake, right?
Right.
They do have value. Why do they have value? Number one, remember, we no longer live at an age where the geopolitics will allow us to reach consensus on sets of binding rules. Yeah,
Okay.
that's not possible. Given the current geopolitics and volatility in the world, there is too much mistrust. Despite the trust that exists within COPUOS, there is too much mistrust to actually converge on a set of binding rules. So we have to think of, okay, what is the best we can do? The best we can do is foster shared political will, which is like a gentleman's agreement, which is worth a lot because it has trust and it does have political will. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, that we all agree that we believe that the best way to approach this is to work along this set of principles, and we will do our best to abide to those. Yeah. If we can all get into a room and negotiate them, and you have to believe that they're doing it for real because they invest a hell of a lot of time in this. The
Sure.
long-term sustainability guidelines took almost a decade or a decade to negotiate, but they are the treaty of our times, if you will, right? And they embodied the shared political will of all of the COPUOS members. Yeah. So now they're doing the same thing in an accelerated time frame around space resources. The objective is to come out with a finalized set of guidelines by 2027. Yeah, so that work is in process. But if we think of the LTS guidelines for a second, because we were talking about binding and non-binding,
Right.
part of that work is to take now, go from paper to practice. A set of guidelines is not worth its weight unless it's implemented. What does
Sure.
that mean? That brings us back to space law. What we are doing at UNOOSA is collecting examples of what does it mean to implement the different guidelines. We have countries who are implementing them at national level. Think of guideline B1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is all about traffic, space traffic coordination, information sharing, sharing point of contact information. In Japan, in India, we see those governments putting national guidelines into place, which are making it mandatory for future operators, if they want a license, to actually be obliged to share information about the location of their satellites and so on, and making it mandatory for them to subscribe to space situational awareness services so that they are contributing to space safety. Yeah, that's what
Hmm.
it means to implement the LTS guidelines. So similarly with principles guidelines, we need member states to implement them, and that's where our role as a capacity builder is absolutely critical. COPUOS produces the guidelines or the rules or the principles. We help member states understand what it means
Sure.
to transpose them into national frameworks.
Got it. Got it. No, it's again, it's a fascinating portfolio for, as you say, a smaller team, but it's very impressive. All the things that you have to focus on here. What's coming up for the rest of 2025 that we should know about? Because I know you get to a lot of these conferences. I was just reading some of these that are occurring this month. You're going to be at the Space Data Association. There's something coming up for the Africa Space Economy Conference. What other things are on the calendar that we should know about while we have you today, where you're going to be, where we can run into you possibly and meet you and listen to you talk, and anything else that I missed while we have you today that you'd like to mention, please?
Sure. And I think I didn't answer your question about what keeps me up at night. Do you want me to still answer that?
Absolutely not, and I hear about that as well.
Okay, what keeps me up at night are two things. One is the ability of our office to survive the UN80 reform process, which is underway given the liquidity crisis.
Mm,
So the United Nations Secretary General has to respond to the worst financial crisis that the UN has ever faced. In doing that, he is asking every office of the Secretariat to reduce its staff by 20%. We are an office of 25 people, so it is pretty dire for us to have to reduce our staff contingent by 20%. But more than that, the UN is looking at efficiencies, then mandates. The General Assembly has given 3,800 mandates to different entities within the UN, different offices of the Secretariat, and then they will look at how do we merge those, how do we remove duplications and overlaps, how do we optimize and become more efficient, and then they will look at, okay, and how can structures potentially merge. We have UN Women, but we also have UNFPA. We have the United Nations Industrial Development Organization here, but you also have UNDP and other organizations which look at development. So you have UNDRR, the disaster risk reduction, but you also have OCHA, which is looking at humanitarian aid and so on. You have UNFCCC, the climate change people in Bonn that run COP, but you also have UNEP, the environmental program in Nairobi. So you have lots of different instances and organizations within the UN system which potentially have overlaps.
mhm.
COPUOS has no overlap. I mean, we work with different parts of the UN system. We work with ICAO on launch hazard zones. We work with with UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, on the environmental impact of space activities, a new emerging area which is of concern. We work with the ITU to look at, okay, what can we do together because you're in charge of spectrum and interference, and we're in charge of governance at large. There's a certain interaction there. We need to work together. The fear is that because we are so small that we don't have a voice in that process, that there may be misconceptions or misperceptions, misunderstandings of what does UNOOSA do, the uniqueness of the COPUOS mandate, and that we get merged into something which compromises COPUOS's ability to
Yeah.
do what it really does well. Yeah. So that is a major concern, coupled with the financial crisis. I mean, UNOOSA is tiny. We're arguably the Cinderella of the system. Yeah. Tiniest office, infinite mandate. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Why? We were shipped out from New York to Vienna back in 92, out of sight, out of mind. Satellites are out of sight. They've not been in anybody's mind for the longest time. Therefore, we have not been benefited from New York's attention. Budget decisions are made in New York. They don't understand space. Nobody understands space. Space is a niche, right? That's the biggest thing that keeps me awake at night right now. The second thing is, can COPUOS embrace change and a more dynamic way of working? Because
Okay.
it needs to. Yes, it's done a good job. Yes, it has evolved. It has moved from delivering binding rules to a more flexible, agile framework, like it does with space debris mitigation guidelines, like it's doing with the long-term sustainability guidelines, like it's now doing with space resources and so on. Yeah, it is evolving and it's kept up with the time. But space is evolving so fast.
Right.
Within 5 years, what we saw happen on the ISS with Butch and Sunny being stuck on the ISS because of the lack of compatibility of spacesuits and not being
Right.
able to bring those two astronauts down. Within 5 years, that could happen on the moon. Yeah.
Yeah.
COPUOS it has an action team which is looking at compatibility, interoperability, coordination of lunar activities. But COPUOS is still COPUOS. It takes time. Consensus building takes time. So can this body embrace a new way of working to keep pace and actually deliver what the sector at large needs? Yeah, because we need the certainty. Yeah. And this is the body that has the mandate. Nobody else has the mandate. Yeah.
Hmm.
So that is a worry, but it's a challenge, and hey, we rise to challenges. Yeah.
Hmm.
I come from industry. I haven't been put in this role for no reason, right? So we have to hope that between the dynamics of bringing more industry to COPUOS, everything that we see happening, member states are feeling it. More and more member states are seeing the debris land. They are seeing that the treaties that COPUOS delivered are relevant. The space law program, helping countries with the spaceports and new challenges. They are realizing, wow, we want to be part of COPUOS. That's also why we're seeing new applications from member states, because they're like, this is real. And
Yep.
we need them to have more and more of this penny drop moment of this is real, this is relevant, this is crucial, and we have to do this, and we have to do it well and in a timely fashion. So that's a challenge. Yeah. So those are the two big things that are keeping me awake at night right now. And then what was the next question? What can you expect in 2025? Next week we're going to be at UNOC,
Yep.
the United Nations Oceans Conference, where we are a founding member of the Space for Oceans Alliance. This is all about supporting coastal communities and all of those who care about different challenges to do with the oceans, with the sea, have access to space solutions, space data and technology that they need to address them. If we think about countries like Norway, the Norwegian Space Agency, Norway has a blue justice program. They care deeply about environmental crime. Yeah, we know that Peru addressed its illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing problem, leveraging satellite imagery and data, SAR data. Yeah. So Peru, can you imagine? Who would imagine this country was losing $300 million a year to IUU fishing? Yeah, but they started using synthetic aperture radar imagery, which can see at night to monitor illegal vessels coming into Peruvian waters. And they put a law in place obliging any vessels that come into Peruvian waters to keep their automated identification system on and to report their fishing catches. They made it mandatory by law. So they used satellite imagery to enforce the law. And within 1 year, the number of illegal vessels went from a few hundred down to 40 or something like that. Yeah.
Mm.
So transformational. But okay, what have you done? You've helped address the problem in one country, but the oceans are everywhere. The problem just goes somewhere else. It just goes somewhere else. We need to scale. So that's one example, blue justice and environmental crime. But similarly in Tonga, Pacific Island Forum took place there
Right.
with the UN Secretary General just over a year ago. UNOOSA worked with Airbus, with Space Data, a Japanese company, and various space agencies from Australia, Argentina, and I think it was Italy, who helped us build a digital elevation model in order to then create a digital twin
Okay.
for the capital of Tonga. Yeah.
Yep.
Why does that matter for Tonga and for all small island states? Because they're facing the increasing impact of sea level rise.
Yep.
So by giving them a digital twin, the Disaster Management Authority can work with that kind of a tool to simulate the impact to see which are the roads, which are the areas that are going to be impacted first. How do we do urban planning in view of this? How do we put disaster response mechanisms in place before the impacts of sea level rise are really felt? Yeah. So there's so many different examples of how UNOOSA can help in the Space for Oceans Alliance. So we're going to be at UNOC for that. We're going to be at IAC, obviously. We will be running together with the IAF a workshop around disaster management, oceans and fisheries, and all of this kind of topic there. I'm participating in various different events. We will have a booth there as well. Next week, we will also be signing an agreement with the Commonwealth Secretariat to do capacity building for the 56 Commonwealth nations. To help them with space law, space sustainability, disaster management, satellite imagery and data, many different things. Yeah, so lots of different events coming up in 2025 where we will be.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, you have a busy schedule, but it's nice to see all this getting done, and I hope they don't chip away too much of your team, but it's extremely impressive. Artie, one final question while we have you today, and this one, as viewers know, I occasionally give the bio of our guests to my children, and my daughter came up with something kind of interesting, and it was kind of related to when we started chatting before the show. You were talking about sort of all the ambassadors and dignitaries and so forth that knock on your door and come into your office and all that. Um, your title is Outer Space Affairs. When the first outer space dignitary ultimately gets here, do they come see you first, or do they go see the Secretary General? And I was thinking, well, that's kind of interesting. I assume it would be you because outer space affairs. But do you ever discuss that one internally?
So some years ago, my predecessor's predecessor was captured in media around the world that the UN names an ambassador for aliens. Sadly, it was not true. There are no rules around this. I think planetary defense is probably as sexy as we get when it comes to interacting with uh, life or things that are happening beyond our planet and beyond our orbits. But there's no rule on that. Would they come to see us? Maybe. Who knows? Who knows? I guess it's a question of who will find them first, right?
Yeah. Well, they would definitely find you quite interesting, as I have for
I can speak a
mentoring.
few languages. Who knows what they will what
Exactly,
yeah, yeah,
exactly. You're a linguist, so I mean,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
really, again, very impressive, Artie. I just really, I'm rooting you and your team on as you continue these amazing set of programs. Uh, but again, for everybody that is out there that's going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Aarti Holla-Maini, Director, United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. Aarti, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while today about everything you have going on there. I say thank you for everything you do to develop the peaceful use and exploration of space, the progression of the science and technology. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for everybody via what you do. Really an awesome story, and I look forward to continue to follow it.
Thank you so much.
Really great having you.
Great being with you.